I think that your coverage on Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, has been exemplary. I think it's been on the ball from the beginning, particularly the last few weeks. You've had a few pieces. I want to start from a few weeks back, right at the end of August 31st. You write an article focusing on the small businesses in Detroit, in Metro Detroit, particularly bowling alleys, gyms, ice rinks, etc., that are on the verge of collapse. Your article in Cranes outlined a number of issues with Gretchen Whitmer's approach to how these businesses have been handled. She, for example, vetoed legislation, and you discuss this in the article, vetoed legislation that would have given a tax extension to these small businesses just so they could keep their doors open and their bills down a little longer. Just in general, from that article, from your experience, you've interviewed business owners. There was a bowling alley owner that you discussed in great detail in that article. In general, your experience from covering this, how has Gretchen Whitmer handled the small businesses and businesses in general throughout this process?
Well, from the start, the governor took this approach that we had to basically shut down all really what was deemed non-essential business activity that really isn't necessary for the continuation of human life, which at the time that made a lot of sense. I mean, this virus was real and it still is real. It was raging. It was making a lot of people sick really fast. As anybody in Metro Detroit understands, a lot of our hospitals were very much overrun. Beaumont, Royal Oak, Detroit Medical Center, Detroit Receiving Hospital at the DMC, the Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit, all were at capacity, and we really did see a surge. And it was taking up a lot of our resources, burning through PPE. We had hospitals that were down to 2 or 3 days worth. Beaumont Royal Oak was just hanging on the edge. I think U of M, Ann Arbor as well for many weeks there. So the whole idea initially was we got to shut this down. We got to stop this curve from accelerating up. And over time that worked. I mean, I've written that the governor was successful on this. I convinced that the governor saved lives along the way. Then we got into this kind of long, drawn out procedure for trying to reopen the economy. And the governor took this kind of, she used this sort of dial idea that we're turning the dial, we're not flipping a switch. And as they've turned this dial, we started the first week in May. They opened up the construction industry, the real estate industry. Then they let manufacturing and auto plants restarted in mid-May. And then by Memorial Day, she was opening up restaurants and bars up north. And then by the next week in June, it was restaurants and bars downstate. I mean, it was kind of one after another. And then we started basically sort of testing. Really, it was one big science experiment to sort of see how it worked. And we found out pretty quickly, for your East Lansing listeners, that Harper's was not a good place to be in mid-June.
Learn the hard way. Harper's isn't a good place to be at any time of year in any pandemic or not scenario, but that's another story.
Exactly. Well, and so the governor pulled back. And she said, okay, bar service is prohibited indoors if you make more than 70% of your sales from alcohol. And so bars were forced to build outdoor, patios and such, and get creative with their parking lots. And everybody has kind of just gotten along all summer long. Well, they did all of this. They accommodated all these other businesses. And then they left a bunch of businesses kind of on the sideline over here. The couple of the big ones were the casinos in Detroit that had a plan at the beginning of June that they were going to go back to 15% occupancy, which is kind of like what normal daily traffic looks like at Greektown Casino, basically.
Yeah.
Except for with the exception of like big fight nights and other, big events or when they have concerts, those places aren't packed to the gills ever. But they let the casinos reopen beginning of August. And then it was like, okay, if you're going to like casinos, if that's an okay behavior to go and just pull a slot machine, why can't you go pick up a bowling ball? And I'll be honest, I'm not too hot about bowling in the pandemic. I like bowling. I'm not like a regular bowler, but just to back up, a little backstory. On Sunday, March 8th, I went bowling with my whole family at Belmark Lanes in Ann Arbor for my brother's birthday party. We all met up there. And after that, I went to the Diag at U of M with 10,000 of Bernie Sanders' best friends to cover a Sanders rally on 2 days before the primary. So I look back at that and think, holy cow, I was really exposed, potentially to the virus in multiple settings. The next day, I was with the governor. She was at the Livonia Chamber of Commerce, and she was trying to promote elbow bumps and such. But that night, I went to a rally with a Joe Biden rally with 1,500 people at Detroit Renaissance High School in the gymnasium. Now they handed everybody a big pile of hand sanitizer on the way in, but still. Like I look back and I'm like, oh man, between the bowling alley and the Bernie rally and the Biden rally, there's a lot of places you could get exposed. I don't have any interest in going to a political rally personally or even professionally at this point, and I don't have any interest in going bowling, but I do have an interest in understanding the decision making that goes on in state government that is basically bankrupting a bunch of businesses in Michigan right now by keeping them closed indefinitely. And they've since I wrote about the bowling alley thing, the governor did allow organized sports, so that has created a loophole for bowling alleys to operate for leagues only. So apparently it's okay if a bunch of 50-year-old men and 60-year-old men get together and bowl on Tuesday night, but it's not okay for a bunch of 16-year-old teenagers to go laser bowling or whatever they call it on Saturday night at Belmark Lanes in Ann Arbor or wherever. And so that's part of what my job at Cranes is, just kind of like fly spec some of this stuff, try to understand, okay, what is the reasoning here? And as we've gone along further and further, there's been just a lot of head scratching amendments to these executive orders that you can't hardly make sense of. That the governor's office has to then turn around and explain in their frequently asked questions. The governor herself does not answer very many questions about these EEOs anymore, and her staff is never made really available to do so. So they have to put out these FAQs that have sort of, they're not really law, but they're being sort of treated like, well, if you don't understand, this is what we really mean, is that, yeah, you can have an event with 250 people up north, but you can't have a wedding with 250 people. I mean, there's just all the kinds of different things that you even a person plain reading the executive orders could not decipher. And I've been just following this because I also talk to a lot of people, and both in the business industry that are trying to live under the rules, and I think a lot of small businesses that have adapted this. A lot of businesses in general, they've adapted this, knowing that they take the virus really seriously, and they also want to be able to work, to make a living, and
God forbid.
And that's what they're and so they're willing to jump over. I mean, these bowling alleys will just do anything the governor tells them to at this point, in order to basically make money to pay their taxes, pay their insurance, pay their just fixed costs. I mean, it's not so simple as you just shut down and you don't have any expenses because you had to lay all your workers off. Well, yeah, you still have the property tax bill that came due in July, and you still have insurance, and you still have other overhead costs that have nothing to do with just operating the business day to day. And I'm not trying to take the side here of the bowling alley or the movie theater, but I am trying to understand is, how does that business get back to work? And if not, well, maybe state government ought to be just paying these businesses to not operate in the good of public health. And I've suggested that as well, that if we're not going to let them reopen, we ought to just cut them a check for their fixed expenses of leases, rent, mortgage, utilities. I mean, it sounds very Bernie Sanders, but it's actually, really a reasonable idea at this point. You're 6 months in, and you're going to basically ruin a small number of people's lives if you continue to keep them closed indefinitely without any way to really make money.